Hey, it's Mo Ari.
And Tiffany.
And you're listening to the Love Goals podcast. Before we get into this episode, I just want you to remember that every human, regardless of identity, needs these three things: belonging, authenticity, and love.
And after a decade of partnership, we've learned to co-create these things and so much more.
So from wherever you're listening, we're going to go on a journey of becoming our own #love goals. Now let's get into this episode. Hey, it's Mo Ari.
And Tiffany.
And you're listening to the #Love Goals podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
I am so excited, Tiffany, because
okay,
we have our very first listener question.
Yes, we do.
And thank you. If you want to send more questions, please do that.
Yes.
This person will be anonymous, but if you ever want to share your question and then you want us to include it in an episode with your name, just let us know in your message. Or you can go to the link through our Anchor podcast site or Spotify podcast site, and you should be able to leave a message, an audio message with your question. Yep. So you could do that many ways. DM us. Send us a smoke signal with your question, whatever. But we want your questions. From you. Yeah. So for this episode, the question is: how do you define cheating in a relationship? What constitutes good boundaries or healthy boundaries in a relationship? I'm just gonna throw that right at you.
Ooh, you starting off strong from the gate. Cheating. My definition of cheating is engaging in behaviors or relationships that are somehow inappropriate.
Okay.
Or goes against some boundary or standard set by an existing relationship. And if we're talking about cheating, I'm going to say romantic relationship.
Yeah.
So activity, behavior, engagement in a relationship with another person that goes against an already existing boundary that either feels inappropriate, crossing the line, of any sort, but it's based on your relationship. Like, I cannot give a broad sweeping definition of cheating, period. But to a person, if you're already in an existing romantic relationship and you set these standards and you've engaged in a way that is misaligned, that to me feels like cheating.
Yeah. So essentially you're saying, if there is an agreement that is already on the table,
right?
Some people call it a covenant.
Yes.
There is an agreement on the table. For your relationship. If you break that agreement in some way with regard to like romantic connection or intimacy with another person, then that's what cheating is. Yeah. I agree that it really has to be defined by you and your relationship. I think that there are some standards we set for the relationship or expectations we have for our relationships that are not necessarily the most healthy. So let's bag it all the way back to how we define monogamy. Because I think monogamy is a challenging one at this day and time, because we've learned a lot over the past 50, 60 years about how monogamy has even evolved since baby boomers, right? So my challenge with answering the question around cheating is me wanting us to like think about monogamy in a more nuanced way, because what constitutes a healthy standard for a relationship or agreement for a relationship really has to do with what we learned about monogamy and whether or not we can unpack a lot of that in order to have a relationship that's expansive and not restrictive. That's why I don't even like the word boundary anymore. I like standards and I like, because boundaries really should expand, but often we use them to build walls and we do things with boundaries that limit relationships. So oftentimes people think about monogamy in this way. They think about monogamy as what you cannot do. And I like to think of what you choose to be your relationship type as expansive. What are all the possibilities of how our relationship can look? And really not deal so much with the limitations. And I think monogamy was set up in order to limit relationships, which is why so many people struggle with upholding those agreements. So my ideal relationship around monogamy is one where everybody is kind of monogamish, meaning that we understand and maybe honor the values that monogamy holds, as in, like, I want to be with one person romantically, sexually, physically, spiritually. But we honor that, one, all of the people that I choose to be in relationship with probably have other significant relationships that are important. So they might not be the only relationship where I have emotional investment. So that's a monogamish example, because at a point in the 90s, we heard a lot of people talking about emotional cheating. What is emotional cheating? Having friends?
Intimacy with other people.
Right. Where do I need to check myself and my jealousy about you having intimacy and emotional intimacy with other people? So that's why I say today, because of what we know about monogamy, if we are taking monogamy as it has been, can we all become monogamish? And then look at cheating from that place. So setting the standard not based on limits, jealousy, control over another person's body, time, resources, whatever. Can we look at monogamy as something that expands, as in, you know, a life partnership, the ability to do something with that person, ongoing, long-term living together, whatever monogamy provides, but make it a monogamish idea versus one that's restrictive.
I totally agree with you. And I think having that monogamish view is literally the idea of being and creating your own love goals. Like, the willingness to say, like, you know, I know my parents did it like this, my grandparents did it like this is what they said cheating was, this is what society says cheating was, this is how I want to set up my relationship, these are the standards that I have. And because we've made these certain agreements, that doesn't mean that if, you know, this couple over here disagrees, that then, you know, this particular thing means we're cheating or we're not. It just means this is what we have created. And I think that in this conversation, it's very important to own and create your own standards, like you're saying, your own, without being limited by using boundaries, but your own relationship monogamous definition, so to speak.
Not to like take over your example, I'm gonna give it back to you and
No,
let
go
you set
ahead.
it up. But I'm wondering if an example that could work well here, maybe the example of like having a coworker, let's say, that is like really flirty. Let's say you're at like a holiday party, your wife is there, whatever, and you meet this coworker for the first time. The coworker is like, yeah, this is my work husband. I'm glad you get him at home because I get him 8 hours of the day. And nothing, maybe that's innocent, but your reaction to that matters. Now I'm gonna let you set that up. And
everybody will respond differently to that happening, right? I would imagine. And I don't think that there's one right way or a wrong way to respond to being at this company party and, you know, a coworker makes this statement, or a coworker says, I'm their work wife, or I'm their work husband, or whatever the situation might be. I think that we can sometimes allow society or other people's ideas of what that means to dictate then how we respond. And I think the duty in relationship, or it doesn't have to be like duty, like I have to do it, but like the responsibility in relationship is for us to be able to define whether something really bothers us or not.
right.
You know, like there's so many moments that I've had to really check myself and be like, does this even bother me? Or does it bother me because I think it's supposed to bother me?
Right.
And so in an instance where that would happen at work, I might be like, you know, I might make a little a little face or something like that, but it's not something that would inherently bother me.
Where you're getting is like inherently in that you're so secure, and I'm not going around being problematic in any way or challenging. So you're like, okay, that was just what this other person who's not in our covenant, not in our agreement did. What am I going to be mad for? Right? Sometimes in our culture, it's been like, why don't you check her? Why don't you tell her not to say that stuff? How is someone that's outside of your agreement impacting your agreement? That's like saying somebody, like you signed an NDA with a company or something, somebody outside of your agreement is saying something ridiculous. It doesn't change the agreement you have. Like if I was like wringing my neck, trying to look at somebody's behind, that though could create, if you did find that disrespectful or you found that to be like against what we had talked about or agreed to, that could set up the kind of energy that makes you look at all things that I'm doing in a challenging way. And I think that this is how the cheating, the monogamy dynamic starts to shift toward jealousy, confusion, irritation, insecurity, because it's not always that somebody is just so crazy that their partner and they're just making up all this stuff about their partner. It's that their partner may be operating in ways that feel like they are against that agreement, even if it's like borderline against the agreement, if that makes sense. So I'm glad you brought up those examples because the two are different. In the other example, my coworker just said something. I haven't done anything. She's not in our agreement. In the other example, I am doing something. Now, it's not physically, walking up to her and smacking her behind, but it still borders on something that maybe feels like a violation to the other person in this scenario, which would be you.
Right, absolutely. And you are mentioning agreement a lot here, and I'm wondering, I guess, so I have a question for you. At what point does a couple, let's say, create this agreement? And is this agreement one that is bestowed upon the couple from a pastor or a religious leader or a spiritual leader at the wedding day, or does it stop there? Or like, talk a little bit more about what that agreement looks like, and how you sustain that agreement over time. Does that make sense?
That's so interesting. Of course, I want to honor that we really believe in being your own love goals. So I cannot say that there is a specific time when this should happen, could happen, whatever. I just want to say that I would strongly suggest that from the very beginning you start talking about what kind of relationships feel best to you, what your relationship type is. So if you call yourself monogamous, monogamish, non-monogamous, polyamorous, talk about that from day one, and then continue to keep talking about it. Allow it to keep evolving. Some people, now this could be the ingredient in your relationship. I don't care what we did, but now that we got to this wedding day, we don't do anything like cheating ever again. Some people, that's their agreement. And they uphold it. So it didn't matter what they did prior to that wedding day. That wedding day changed a lot of stuff. Then some people say, I care about what you were doing prior to this wedding day. And it's really impacting me. And so for everybody it's different, but I just think that it has to be co-created. So you have to be talking about it. If the expectation is that, you won't cheat on me, well, tell me what cheating is. I think I remember when we were, I was going to say younger, because we've been together for a long time. When we were younger, it's crazy, right? When we were earlier in our relationship, I would do this like question game. You got tired of my questions, but I just love like what if questions. So I'll be like, what if I did X?
All the time.
And I think that that's how we have to be, like in the what ifs, not in the what if, the what could be, the possibilities, just so you can understand what the real confines of the relationship are. So how much space you have in the relationship. If you would have said something that was off to me, so I would give these scenarios like, okay, what if I was dancing real close with somebody.
You did this. You asked me this specifically.
And I mean, they really throwing it back.
Yeah.
How would you feel?
Right.
You're like, dance.
Yeah.
That is a part of Black diaspora culture, dance, right? I don't care, right? And I'll be like, okay, that's how I started to understand what you meant by cheating, what you meant by monogamy, what you meant by monogamish. But I couldn't understand that and what you meant by non-monogamy.
Right.
I couldn't understand that unless I asked those questions.
Right. And I think those conversations are so important and the agreement is so important. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here because I feel like some people end up finding themselves cheating based on the confines of their relationship, and they have no idea that they have committed a cheating thing, quote unquote.
Okay. Explain that
And
some
I
more.
say that because this is why I feel like communicating or talking and having an agreement is so important, right? So a person, let's say you did end up, dancing. I mean, y'all juking in the club, okay? They are all up on you. I went to the bathroom, I come back and I see y'all getting it in on the dance floor, right? I could be extremely upset about this. Not me personally, that's not considered cheating, right?
Yeah.
But imagine if we had never, ever, 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 ever had a conversation about how I would respond to or how I would feel if this happened.
Yeah.
Or if we had not an agreement about what it's like when we're out in public. Like how do we, dance with another person, or physically, like how do we interact with another person? I think that the agreement is so important because we all have these different lived experiences. We all have had these, have grown up in families where we have these different definitions of things and different definitions of cheating. So you could end up doing a harm based on what your partner might feel if you never have the conversation about what your standards are as it relates to cheating or infidelities or whatever you want to call it in relationships.
Right. And I love that you're saying that because what it leads me into is how we've evolved as a culture. So even thinking like that many people are non-monogamous, polyamorous, and having even more new experiences and dynamics than generations past. And sometimes I think there's this assumption going in that everything goes. And that's not true. For many non-monogamous polyamorous people, you still have to have the same intentional conversations and the same agreements. The standards for the relationship are just different. In whatever relationship type you're in, the goal here is to, one, be your own love goals, but to also be expansive. You can be expansive and monogamous. You can be expansive and non-monogamous. That's what I think we've learned over the course of exploring all of those things in our relationship.
Absolutely.
We have lived our relationship, explored non-monogamy, monogamy, like what that could look like and everywhere in between. And what is true is that you have to have agreements and all of it can be expansive. It's really about how you show up as healed, whole, secure, grounded in the connection. I think as a culture, we spend a lot of time thinking about cheating because we focus a lot on people breaking agreements. And I want us to really turn that cheating narrative on its head. Like, how can we be more expansive in how we're looking at relationship standards? And then also, how can we look at setting agreements differently so that everybody is clear? And let's get to the bottom of why those agreements are being broken. Are you with someone who has a problem keeping agreements in general? Do you have a communication issue? A lot of times there is a communication issue of some kind where that person did not communicate to you what was happening before it happened.
Exactly.
That's a communication issue. Even if your partner would have been fine with you having sex with another person, let's say in a non-monogamous relationship, they're like, I'm so cool with that. But I want you to tell me so that I'm just aware.
Right, because then that miscommunication can then lead to dishonesty or
Yeah.
feelings of the other person lying.
Yeah.
It can lead to so much more.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That can happen in any type of relationship.
Yep.
And so the agreement piece feels really, really important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Having agreements, communicating about the agreements, allowing those agreements to evolve, and
Yes.
continuously talking about the evolution of those agreements.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that they're so important. And so for the listener that asked us, how do we define cheating? It's like it's one of those things that's like it depends.
It
Like
depends. Yeah.
it's so nuanced to think
Yeah.
it's not like one fell swoop
Yeah.
definition.
We used to think that it was like
Yes.
decades ago as a culture, society, we made it like it was just so defined, which
Exactly.
led to a lot of not having conversation.
Exactly.
We were like, everybody accepts that having sex with another person is cheating.
Yep.
No, it is not to many
Yep.
people. So we
Yep.
have to have the conversations because everybody has a different understanding of what sex
Exactly.
means. I'm not cheating on her because I'm not having an emotional relationship with this person. This is just sex. She is the only
Yes.
person I have ever committed to, married in my life. This
Yes.
is just sex. How could she be mad?
Right.
That's why we have to have conversations. And we have to
Exactly.
get nuanced about those conversations.
Yes. Be annoying, get specific, ask it over and over again. Do all the hypotheticals. Okay.
And then talk about what happens if the agreement is broken. So that you are on the same page about the impact of that as well. I think a lot of times we kind of wander into a bunch of mistakes in our relationships. There's so many things that we've done, I imagine, as people that if we knew what the impact was going to be, we wouldn't do them.
Right.
So in those scenarios, I was like, okay, what if? And I would just be really, I just was having fun.
Yeah.
Like I would be like,
no, it was helpful though.
what if you came home and I was there with somebody that you thought was real cute, but I hadn't told you? I don't know what your reaction was, but I think it was something not pleasant.
It wasn't. Because I think it gets at dishonesty.
Yeah.
And I think that for me personally, that's huge when I think about cheating. It's like, maybe things could fly that might not fly for another person, but it is the transparency and the openness and the communication about these things that I think also even helps in the aftermath when these agreements are broken. We have to communicate about it.
So it was you telling me that would hurt me so much because you couldn't just tell me.
Exactly.
You could have just told me. I would have joined in. But you couldn't tell me.
Right.
That would hurt me deeply. But knowing that that would hurt you deeply and really internalizing that helped me to be like, well, I ain't breaking that agreement. Now, I'm just a very honest person too. But I imagine if we do more of that work too, of the vulnerability of saying, that would hurt me. Not just this, I want to control you through this agreement. Because that's sometimes what we communicate. We don't communicate, I'm seeking control because I am so not wanting to be hurt. So instead of communicating control, communicating, hey, babe, I asked for this to be a standard. Can we co-create the standard together? Because I would feel really hurt. And if they come back and say, you know what, I'm going to challenge you on this standard because this doesn't feel good to me and my body and my person, then you all really have some collaboration to do because we never want to be controlling another person.
Right.
And when we get to thinking in our relationships, like, because I'm in a relationship with you, I tell you what to do with your body and your person. That's a problem. That's something that we learned in our society, which leads to a lot of resentment and upset in relationships. Before, because I can hear women listening to this podcast. I don't like being gendered. This is a moment where I can hear people listening to this podcast saying, now, you're not going to just be doing any and everything when you're in a relationship with me. And I hear that. I want us to challenge that idea of control over anybody else's body, because I want you to think, and especially to women, think about the ways in which historically women have had their bodies controlled and their rights controlled. Nobody likes that in relationship. So it's an example of how it doesn't work and how nobody should have rights over you as a person. We are all sovereign. So we have to really come to relationships as sovereign people. This has to be a co-creation. You cannot be monogamous for someone else. Well, yeah, she wanted me to not talk to this person. No, that better be something you want to do, or you're never going to succeed at it.
Yeah.
If you don't want to have sex with somebody, you're not. If you do, you're gonna do it. So you have to get clear. It can't be, I can't resist temptation for Tiffany.
Right.
I have to be doing that for me.
Yes.
So we really have to search ourselves over. Are we doing monogamy in this very traditional, structured way for the other person? Because that's not going to work. That's how I think we have generations and generations of people starting up families off to the side.
No, you're right. And you speaking about how important agreements and communication was earlier, I'm going to add to the communication piece, the vulnerable communication.
Yeah.
So the ability to say, you know what? I don't really feel monogamous here.
Yeah.
Or also the vulnerability to say, like, well, if this does happen, I would feel like this.
Yeah.
On either side of the coin, I think it's very, very important to be vulnerable and to also understand that it's an evolving process. You might have a conversation about agreement 1 year, and as you exist in relationship, you might say, can we revisit this thing? I want to talk about it a little bit more, dive into it. Something's not really feeling fully aligned here, but being willing to go back to the table, because you literally get to create the relationship that you want and that works for you all. That vulnerable communication piece, I think, is super, super important to this conversation too.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. I love talking to you about these things. We can go on and on for hours and hours. I didn't hit that note right.
You didn't, but it's okay.
But I just love talking to you about these things. I think that these conversations are so expansive. And I thank the listeners for sending questions.
Absolutely.
And if you want to send more questions, be our guest, because we love answering questions. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, so I love giving advice.
You do. I love it. It's great advice though. Yeah.
And you give great advice too.
Yeah.
This has been Be Your Own #Love Goals podcast with Mo Ari
and Tiffany.
We look forward to seeing you all soon. Take care and be well.
Bye. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe.
If you want your question featured in an upcoming episode of the #Love Goals podcast, go ahead and send your question to lovegoalspodcast@gmail.com. Check out our website at lovegoalspodcast.com and follow us on Instagram at Love Goals Podcast. We look forward to hearing from you soon.